An amazing qualifying session in Canada, an astonishing qualifying session in Canada. George Russell on the pole from Max Verstappen by the margin of 0.000, no margin whatsoever. Exactly the same lap time down to a thousandth of a second. But the separation, of course, was that George recorded the time first. He recorded on his first run in Q3. Max recorded it as the checkered flag came out on his second run. And so, as in Formula One tradition and as in the rule book, of course, George Russell took the pole because he recorded that time first. So congratulations to all at Mercedes. Just as it looked as if this was another year going downhill rapidly for them, they've bounced back with this pole in Canada. But what a qualifying session it was, full of intrigue, full of drama. And I suppose an equally big talking point, alongside George being on the pole for Mercedes, was that neither Ferrari got through into Q3. Charles Leclerc and Carlos Sainz will start 10th and 11th, right in the middle of the pack for Scuderia Ferrari. And of course, there is perplexity around the world, for sure in Italy, probably in Spain and in Monaco as well, of how Ferrari's fortunes can change so quickly. Monaco, 2 weeks ago, they were the toast of the Principality. In Canada, couldn't get through to Q3. A lot of it is down to grip, a lot of it was down to tyre management, but there were other variables in play as well. And they were also partially responsible for many of the other quite strange results we saw during the day. And I suppose at the top of the list of those variables is the weather. The prediction for the race is rain. The prediction for qualifying was rain, and it didn't rain. It was a little bit of rain at the beginning of Q3, but nothing to trouble the drivers. But the prediction for the race tomorrow is rain. And of course, that has characterized the way in which some of the teams have approached qualifying. So let's have a look at the speed trap times in qualifying, and I've included the two Ferraris there. The rest of them are the top 10. Lance Stroll quickest 3:33, Fernando Alonso 3:30, and just as a comparison, George Russell 3:30, Lewis Hamilton 3:24. Now there's no doubt that George got a phenomenal tow from his mate Alex Albon on his quickest lap. Just perfectly positioned. Was it planned? Who knows? And we shouldn't forget that George did an 11.7 in Q2 and only that 12.0, if you like, in Q3. And Lewis was the only other driver to get under the 112 barrier also in Q2, but was then slower in Q3. Maybe a time management thing. And if that's the case, it suggests that possibly they are running different setups in terms of stiffness, something like that, softness probably more likely, going into the race tomorrow, which may or may not be wet. And it wouldn't be illogical for teams like Mercedes, like Aston, possibly Red Bull, to be splitting their options, because the weather looks very much a question mark at this stage. I think if you look there, Max Verstappen 3:27, actually 3:26 on his quickest lap when he did that identical lap time to George Russell right at the end, as the checkered flag came out at the stroke of 5 o'clock. Perfect timing, but nonetheless too late to get the pole. Max Verstappen 3:26 on that lap. And if that's not quick. For Red Bull, that is not quick. So that indicates to me, and this is just my opinion, I may well be wrong here, I may be apologising to everybody after the race tomorrow, but in my opinion, that looks as if Red Bull are running a lot of wet setting on that car as well. And Max, if it is wet, should be in very good shape in the race tomorrow, alongside George Russell on the grid. So, because 3:26, 3:27 is not a quick time in a straight line for Max Verstappen. To emphasise the point, he was very, very quick in Sector 1 on his quickest lap. And that is a sector where you can do with quite a lot of downforce as well. So, yeah, I think that's what's going on. Ferrari is the big question mark, because 3:27 as well in a straight line, I don't think they were running, I hope I'm wrong, but I don't think they were running wet settings on the Ferrari. I think that was sort of where they were at with the compromise in terms of top speed and getting the car to be half reasonable with grip levels. And they just seemed to lose their way as FP3 got underway today. Let's look at McLaren, because that's the other interesting one. You could argue, given how good they've been overall in terms of top speed and grip and balance, of course, I've said in the dry, I don't think they're in quite the same class as Red Bull yet, but they've been very, very good. Lando Norris 3:25, not very quick, and Oscar Piastri 3:26. Fractionally quicker, and that would suggest I think they're running quite a lot of, they're tending towards wet settings as well on the McLaren. So for where Lando is on the grid, P3 on the grid, really good performance, and Oscar Piastri right behind him, looking very, very strong as well. So I think it's very easy to say they're running less or more wing. It's not just that. I think it's also other setups in the car, because going to Canada, all 3 days had rain written all over them. We did have rain on Friday. We didn't have rain today. So obviously it's a nail-biting Saturday night going into Sunday for those who are running wet settings, who need it to be wet. If you're George Russell, you don't really mind. You're on the pole. You've got the advantage of being on the pole, particularly avoiding the first corner accident, which inevitably will occur between 1 and 2 and 3, probably. I hope not, but it probably will if it is wet. And of course, you'll have the advantage of visibility if it is raining. Having said that, Max should be incredibly quick tomorrow if it's wet. If it's dry, I think George Russell's got a very, very good chance of winning the Canadian Grand Prix. The other thing was Sergio Perez not getting out of Q1. He was waving his fist and stuff, and obviously there was a story about traffic in Q1, and it was terrible because of the threat of rain. Everybody was stacked up in the pit lane at the beginning of every session, and at the moment, as I speak, there's a bit of an investigation going on for Max, because they parked his car behind Oscar Piastri's McLaren in Q2 in the rush to try to get out as quickly as he could, and I think it's come under the heading of barging into the queue in the pit lane. They then let everybody go, so I don't think he'll get any sort of penalty, but that just shows how frenetic it was and how under pressure everybody was to get out there and do a time, and Sergio didn't do a time. And if I was James Hunt, which of course I'm not, but if I was James Hunt doing the commentary as he used to do it for the BBC, and he used to get unbelievably annoyed with Ricciardo Patrese, because James had worked out that whenever Ricciardo renewed his contract or signed a new contract, his driving dropped in terms of performance, lap times, speed, race, qualifying, a factor of about 25%, according to James. In other words, once you've got the deal done, you just relax for 3 or 4 races and then you start being a racing driver again. And it looks as if Sergio Perez is doing the same thing. He's done his deal for 2026 through to the end of 25, I guess we got to say, and maybe 26 onwards, who knows. And now he's relaxed, and he just never really looked like he was going to be in the Max Verstappen, remotely in the Max Verstappen class all weekend so far. And where he is on the grid, of course, it's going to be a very difficult race for him. So put it down to the Patrese syndrome for Sergio Perez this weekend, I think. And now just going through the grid, George Russell on the pole, Max Verstappen alongside him. And it's not too bad to be P2 in Canada. It's rather a strange shape on the track there that's going to the right, and then they're breaking into that left-hander. And so Max will be in quite good shape, regardless of what sort of starts he makes, either for the left-hander or the next right, the tight right. So that'll be worth watching. Lando Norris, P3, just ahead of Oscar Piastri. Very, very good performance from both drivers, again, in the McLaren-Mercedes. Excellent performance. And Daniel Ricciardo, outstanding, but also Yuki Tsunoda, very, very quick in Q2 and making it through to Q3, obviously, as a result, and will be starting P8 and celebrating his contract's been renewed through to the end of 2025 as well, deservedly so, I think. But that car, that Visa Cash app, has been really quick and super quick in a straight line all weekend. Probably running dry settings, got to say, but we'll see what happens in the race tomorrow. If it's wet, if it's dry, they're in really good shape. Fernando Alonso, P6, pretty good job for him in the Aston Martin. There were moments when Lance Stroll was quicker, but Fernando put in some very, very good laps. And the Aston, as I said yesterday, looks very good in the wet, which would suggest also that I think Fernando is running pretty good wet settings on that car. And if it is wet tomorrow, he should go very well. Lance Stroll, I think, has got drier settings on the Aston Martin. As I said earlier, top speed would bear that out. But nonetheless, very good performance to be P9, both Aston Martins in the top 10. Alexander Albon, again, a good job in the Williams-Mercedes, P10 for him as well, ahead of the 2 Ferraris, you could say. So if Carlos Sainz is going to Williams, he could say to Charles, hey, look at the team I'm going to be with next year. Logan Sargent, very good job. Got through into Q2 in the other Williams, ahead of Kevin Magnussen and Pierre Gasly, who've been driving on the edge all weekend, and they deservedly got through to Q2. Nico Hulkenberg, Esteban Ocon, Valtteri Bottas were the others, and Guanyu Zhou went off again at the beginning of FP3 this morning, so not a very good performance from him, you got to say, in the Stake Sauber. So that's it for qualifying a really interesting grid, a fascinating grid, an amazing grid, and one, of course, that will bring a big smile to all the Mercedes fans out there, particularly to the face of Toto Wolff, who's had a lot of criticism recently, from me included. But there they are doing a great job. And so many variables around this weekend, from it being the range of soft Pirelli tyres. That's the same for everybody, but nonetheless it may play into the hands of one team more than another in terms of the way they can use the tyres on that car, with the setup they're running, with the downforce they're running, the weather, and how Friday went. Bear in mind with Max Verstappen, for example, he didn't do a lot of running on Friday. He was okay in FP3, but he was doing medium tyre runs with fuel when others were getting ready with the soft tyres, and he was still running light fuel when others were doing fuel runs. So it's just Red Bull strangely out of sync, and Max strangely out of sync, and he had a problem with the steering as well in FP3. So he hasn't really had a very good weekend. And there were question marks. Certainly I had a question mark in my mind about how he would go in qualifying and whether things would start to come right. And they did, as Red Bull normally do. They magically got it right. But in Q2, it was really, really difficult. He was on the edge. He was out in Q2 until right at the end. He just got in a lap, but put in P6 right at the end as the checkered flag was going. So as a result of that, Max was probably, and Red Bull probably, in the mode of bank a lap on his first run when George did that time, and then going forward on the second run and almost getting there, but not. And if we're taking into account different settings, that probably explains it all. If they were on the same settings, then I'm completely lost as to what was happening there. The other point I think you've got to say about Mercedes is that they really ran Q3 very well and kept George and Lewis in the garage for about 2 minutes when everybody else was out. They didn't fall prey to the pressure of getting out there because of the weather. They just stayed calm, got out, got lovely free laps. The tow from Alex Albon notwithstanding, of course. But really well-run qualifying session by Mercedes and by George. And the other final thing, I think, and just thinking of Gilles Villeneuve again, and how he once said to my friend Nigel Roebuck, when Formula One just got, well, as is today, too much grip, too much downforce. And in those days, it was the advent of ground effect and everything else. Gilles said, it's a sad day when going sideways isn't the quickest way to drive a Formula One car. And I know this wasn't quick. And George got on the radio and said, whoa, nearly lost it out of whatever it was, that first chicane, whatever turn it is. But it was an unbelievable moment with the back end coming out on the Mercedes halfway through the exit of the corner. I mean, he'd got the corner done basically, and it was a car control thing, but it's a quick bit of road there by the time you're on the power, and George's car control was just wonderful. So was Carlos Sainz, actually. They showed a slow-mo of Carlos. Probably Charles would have been as well, but didn't actually see anything from Charles. But coming out of the last chicane, just dancing. Beautiful car control in slow-mo. But going back to George, just an amazing moment on a pretty dodgy corner with a concrete wall on the outside. So I suppose on that moment alone, you've got to say George Russell deserved the pole in Canada. It was just a fabulous moment. So yeah, a lot to talk about. A lot going on. Probably this does seem all over the place. And if it's all over the place because there are so many variables in play at the moment. Will it rain tomorrow? They thought it was going to rain in qualifying. Of course, don't forget that the cars were in parc fermé going into qualifying. They thought it was going to be wet for qualifying. It wasn't. They think it's going to be wet tomorrow. We don't know if it will be, of course, based on what happened today. It looks like 50% of the top 10 have got settings that will serve them well if it's wet tomorrow, and 50% will go really well if it's dry tomorrow. And those are the other variables. And it's not just wing, as I say, it's going to be other things that they build into the car to do with the softness of the suspension, traction, things like that. And they will have affected the way those cars perform today in the dry on those soft Pirellis. So that's why some teams had problems getting the tyres to work, preparing them, managing them correctly, compared with others. Everybody had problems, their own problems, but I'm talking about the relative problems, if all that makes sense. So yeah, really looking forward to the race tomorrow with a grid looking like this. It's going to be, don't miss it, is all I can say. In closing, we lost another great one a couple of days ago, so that's what these pictures now are all about, to remember one of the great drivers, one of the great American race drivers. In the meantime, thanks for watching. See you tomorrow.